Hey, let's build a Webflow project that uses attributes plus some custom code to fetch external data from an API and feed it into the collection list. Let me show you what we're going to be building. So we have here this collection list that is using CMS filter, CMS sort, and CMS load to be able to filter the list, to be able to sort the list, and also to be able to paginate that list. So we can load more items here. But the difference here is that what you see, it's not the data from Webflow, it's the data that comes from an external API. In this case, just for demo purposes, we're going to be using this fake store API, which is basically just an API that returns some fake data from store products. We can see it here that the data is just some random data with some titles, descriptions, categories, images, and all this stuff. The way that we'll be building this, it's by using the new JavaScript API that we've released of some attributes, not all of them, but some of them. This JavaScript API will let us add some custom coding and interact with the logic of the attributes to be able to feed these external data inside. Everything that we're going to be building here, we'll add it into a GitHub repo so you can access the custom code and you can see and follow along with this video if you want to. So we'll leave the link in the description so you can check it out, and also the Webflow project link so you can inspect how is it built. And talking about the project, let's go into it. Let's see how this is set up. This is a regular setup in Webflow with a collection list that's loading some random items, which we don't care of because we're just using placeholders for now. And we'll replace them with the actual data that we feed from the external API. So in this case, we have a bunch of cards that has some images, titles, categories, descriptions, and all the items that you see have already in place the attributes. So we have an attribute for CMS load, CMS filter, CMS sort defining the list. We've also defined the headings for the title to be able to sort them. Also the categories field for CMS filter to be able to filter them, and as well as some selectors that we'll be using for custom code, but we'll get into these in a second. We have the dropdown for sorting in place. We have the list set up in a way that we already have the defined pagination. So we already set up that we want 6 items per page. We don't need to show more than 7. So we just have these next button in place and we can interact with it. But we don't care about the rest because we'll be deleting all of these placeholders in a second. So yeah, we have these. We don't need attributes for this. Attributes already reads it, so it's going to work out of the box for us. And we have the scripts in place. So we have the script for CMS filter, CMS load, CMS sort, plus the custom code that we'll be using. You can add this custom code on your own way. We'll probably make videos about the workflow that we use, but for now, just follow along with us. So first, let's dive also into the JavaScript API documentation so you can see a grasp of what we're going to be using. If you go to npm, you can access right now the documentation for CMS load, CMS filter, all the CMS packages, plus the CMS core that defines the instances. We'll get into these in a second. CMS load documentation, we'll start with this one because we want to fetch data and feed it into the collection list. You don't need to use CMS load for this. You can use actually any CMS attribute, but we'll use CMS load in this case. And you can see that the documentation, it's already showing us a snippet that we can use to safely access the CMS load instance after the attribute has finished loading. All the attributes, well, not all of them, but most of the attributes, we load them on the page using an async tag. This is for performance reasons, but the downside of the async tag is that you cannot reliably run code always after this script has run, because the async tag runs whenever it has finished loading. So in this case, attributes allows us to run a callback after the attribute in place has finished loading by using this push method that exists on the FS Attributes object on the window. Cool. So we are in VS Code, we'll be coding here, and we'll be coding using TypeScript. If you're not a TypeScript user, don't worry, you can still follow along with this video. We're just going to sprinkle the JavaScript code with some type definitions on top of it so the code is safer and more easy to work with. So let's start with the snippet that the JavaScript API docs it's proposing us. Let's copy this for a second. And now that we've defined the FS Attributes instance on the global window object, we can push a callback to it. So let's say FS Attributes, and we'll call the push method. And this method, what it takes, it's a tuple with two values. The first one is a string that defines the attribute that we want to access. So in this case, we want to access CMS load. And the second one, it's a callback that will run after CMS load has finished loading. This callback also provides us with an array that, let's call it list instances, an array of CMS list instances. These instances are created by all the CMS attributes and are used for managing all internal data that happens within the CMS attributes. This, you can find the type definition of this instance in the CMS core documentation. So if you go to npm Finsweet attributes CMS core, by the way, we'll leave the link in the description so you can access it. You will find the definition of all the properties and all the methods for the CMS list instance. So we'll be using this. You can see that we also set in place some type definitions, so it's easier for us to work with this. If you want to get the type definitions, just come into the GitHub repo and just access them. You will see the link in the description also. So I think we're ready to start. Let's start by defining the tasks that we want to perform. So we first want to get the list instance. Then we want to save a copy of the template element. We'll get back to this in a second. We also want to fetch the external data. And we want to remove the placeholder items that exist when we load the page. We want to create the new items from the external data. And lastly, we want to feed the new items into the CMS list instance. So attributes knows about the new items that we fetched. Great. Let's start with this one, the first one. So this returns an array of CMS list instances because attributes creates a new instance for every single collection list, like this one, for every single collection list that exists on the page. So if you had another collection list for any other purpose that's using CMS attributes, that also would be inside this array. We do know that we just have one. So we know that the first one, let's say a list instance, it's the list instances, the first one. And let's make this prettier by just destructuring like this. We know that this is the one that we have because we just have one. But in case that you had a lot of collection lists and you didn't know exactly which was the order on the page, you can always use, because this is an array, you can use find and try to find your collection list based on some property. For example, if we go to the documentation, the CMS list stores the wrapper element, the collection list wrapper element, as well as the list. Well, all the elements are inside this instance. So you could potentially use that to say, for example, I want to find a list instance where the wrapper is equals to my wrapper that I already queried, for example. But for now, let's just keep it simple. First list instance is the one that we want to get. Second task, we want to save a copy of the template element. And let's recap here. We have this collection list with few items, but all of them, they don't have the data yet. We just have placeholders. This is a mock element. And we're going to be just taking the first element and use it as a template so we can clone that template and populate it with the data that comes externally. So in this case, we want to access this first item. And the way that we can do it is by saying list instance.items, because this in here, and if we check the documentation, this has stored here. This has stored an array containing all the CMS items that also have a specific instance, and we'll get to this in a second. So let's say we want to get again the item. So we can say we want to get the first item. And because we can do this better, let's do some destructuring like this. So this item in here, it's the first one that belongs here on the collection. And this, it's a CMS item instance, which also is defined here in the CMS core docs. So we go down here. Also, you will see that every item on the collection has this interface defined with some properties like the element, the list where it belongs to, the index where the item is rendered in the list, the URL to the template page. You have a lot of things that you can use. And in this case, what we want to access is the actual element. So let's call this item template element, and this will be the item element like this. Cool. So we have now this stored, and we're going to use this template in a second. But first, let's fetch the external data. To make this a little bit more organized, let's create another function for this. Let's say fetch products like this. And this function will be returning an array of product. You can see that I already added the type definitions for the API. Let's remember that this API is returning this array of products with the title, price, description, category, image, all this stuff. So we'll be using this. And in here, actually, this will be async, and this will return a promise like this. Cool. So in here, we want to make a try catch just in case something goes wrong. And if it fails, we'll just return an empty array. But let's say the response, let's fetch the data. So here we want to fetch from the API. So let's copy this URL in here and let's paste it here. And second thing, we want to parse this data as a JSON blob. So this will be response.json like this, but we want to add type definition. So this will be an array of products like this. And we need to, oh wait, cool. And lastly, we want to return this array of products. So now we have this function that fetches the products from the fake API. Cool, let's use this. So we're here and we're saying that the products are fetch products like this. Cool. Let's add async so JavaScript doesn't complain about this await. And now we already have the template, we have the products. Let's remove the existing placeholders. So all these items that you see here are just placeholders for developing. So you have in place define the amount of items that you want on the page, because attributes reads that and uses it internally. You have for the pagination and all this stuff, but we don't care about the items. These items in here, we don't want them. So let's remove them. And we can do it with a list instance method that it's called clear items. This method, you can find the definition also here in the documentation. And what basically does is it clears all the stored items on the collection list and also removes the DOM elements from the page. Cool. After this, our collection list is empty. It's clear. There's nothing here. We can move on and add our own custom elements in place. So we need to create the new items based on the template and based on the data that we fetched. So let's make another function for this. Let's say new item, and this will be a function that takes the definition of a product, and also it takes the template element. And we know that this is a div element because it's a collection item. So basically this function let's break down the tasks. We need to clone the template element so we can use it, and it will be the new item that we add on the collection. Secondly, we want to query the internal elements of the collection item because we have a bunch of elements that we want to populate. We want to populate the image, we want to populate the title, the category, and the description. And lastly, we want to populate the items, internal items like this. Cool. So let's first clone the template. Let's call this new item, and we're going to say the template element, we want to clone the node, and we want to make it dip. So it clones not only the element, but also all the children of that element. And because we're using TypeScript, let's make a type assertion here to make sure that it understands that it's a div element. Cool. So now we can query. Let's query, for example, not the item, the image. So we want to query this image inside the element. You can see that we already defined a bunch of selectors so we can use them. And I've called it data element. So we can use this for selecting the image. Also for the title, I have data element title. Same for the category. We have data element category, etc. So let's say new item. We want to query selector, and this will take a string that's called data element, and this is image like this. And again, because we're using TypeScript, we want to tell TypeScript that this is not a regular element, this is an image element, so we can access some of the properties of the element. Great. So let's duplicate this and do the same for the rest. We can say now that this is the title, and it will be data element title, and this will be a heading element, actually, not an image. So heading element. This will be the category like this. So same in here. Let's copy and paste this. And the category is a text block, so this will be a div element. And lastly, let's fetch the description. Description, I said it correctly. Cool. And this is a paragraph. Cool, like that. Great. So now we want to, now that we've created the elements, we want to access them and populate them. Because we're using TypeScript, TypeScript will complain that maybe those elements do not exist on the collection item. Because maybe some coworker of yours comes in and removes an element, and then the code breaks. And we don't want that happening. So we are going to assert that it exists. So let's say if the image exists, we want to add the source of the image, which will be the product.image. This product contains the data from the product API that's calling. So we'll be feeding the image field inside the source of the image like this. Cool. So now we can proceed with the title. So let's say title.text content, because we want to replace the inner content of this title. Let's say that this is the product.title like this. Cool. And let's just duplicate this, because this will be the category and this will be the description. And sorry, I messed up here. This is the product category. Great. We have cloned the element. We have queried the internal elements. We have populated those elements. And now we'll just return this new item so we can use it. And let's just add a quick description here. And it's say creates a new collection item from the template plus the external data. Cool, like that. We don't need these returns for now. We can get rid of this one too. Great. So now let's create all the items from these fetched data. So let's say new items. This will be the products, and let's map this. And let's say that for each product, we want to create a new item. And this function accepts the product and also accepts the item template element like this. Cool. So now we have an array of div elements, which is the new items that we created from the template. And the last thing that we need to do is feed these new items into the collection list. So again, we have another method that's very helpful, very convenient, that it's called add items like this. So CMS list add items, which basically will add those items and let attributes read all the data from the items. So let's say that the list instance, we want to add the items and we want to add not the new item, but the new items like this. When you add new items, attributes renders them on the page. So if you have some animation like the fade out and fade in of the filtering or pagination, this animation will run. So if you want to wait before you run any other code, you can actually await this because it returns a promise that resolves when the animation and the rendering has finished. So yeah, we'll wait for that. Cool. So we're ready to check out if this solution is working. Let's reload the page and now we can see the mock elements, and in the background, the external data is being fetched. This fetch is pretty slow, but it's not because of our code. It's because we're using a public API. Look, it already worked. We're using a public API that it's very slow because it's free and nobody wants to, you understand. So yeah, let's do it again just for a second. Just let's check out the products are being fetched. It takes a while. It's fine. Your own API, it's probably going to be way faster. But yeah, now all the fake elements, all the mock elements have been replaced with the new elements in place. We have the data and let's compare it. So we have the first shawl raven. I don't know how to pronounce this. But yeah, cool. It's the first one. So the data's coming already here. And let's see if we can sort it. Cool. Yeah, we can. So we can sort and also we can paginate. That's great. The reason why we can already do this is because the moment that we added the items inside the collection list instance, the CMS list instance, attribute already does everything for us. So it reads the data from the items. It knows that we have defined the attributes for the CMS filter field, the attributes for the CMS sort field. Also, it knows that we have 6 items per page and that we have a next button. So attributes knows everything and just handles it for us. So we just edit the items and everything works out of the box. And actually not everything except the filters. And the reason why filters are not working is because we need to tell attributes, hey, we want to filter by this specific data. In our case, we want to filter by categories. So the next step to take is to collect all the categories from the items. And then we'll be taking this radio button in here, which is a mock radio button, and we'll be populating radio buttons for each of the categories that we want to use. But we'll leave this for another video. So for now, let's keep it like that. Yeah, and stay tuned because the next video will be about creating the filters and enabling filtering for this specific example. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching. If you like this, if you enjoyed this, leave a thumbs up. You can share it. You can tag us in Twitter or whatever you want, and we'll be happy to see it. So that's it. Thank you, everyone.